Hi, everyone, and welcome to Treeline Review's How to Afford a Through Hiking or Through Hiking Lifestyle panel. My name is Liz Snorkel Thomas. I am the editor-in-chief and co-founder of Treeline Review. Our goal here at Treeline Review is to help you buy right the first time. And one of our goals specifically around that is obsessively researched gear reviews. And our idea behind that is to make it easier for you to make the decisions that will ultimately be one of the more expensive parts of your through hike, which is putting together your gear. So I'm going to introduce you to our three panelists here. And they're going to tell you a little bit about their hiking experience as well as sort of their financial planning and how they would describe themselves on the scale of budget to luxurious hiker, and possibly how that's changed over the years as well. So first, I'm going to let Felicia POD or Macio go first.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name's Felicia, or POD, which is Princess of Darkness. I am a triple crowner. I live in Colorado, and I also have done pretty extensive hiking beyond the Triple Crown. I started my first hike in 2002 on the AT, and I was 25. I was working as a chemical engineer for General Motors. And I've done lots of hiking since then. I did change careers. Did a few different things in there and eventually settled on teaching. I'm now a special education teacher at the elementary school level. And I would say that I'm a relatively budgety type of hiker. I don't exclusively eat from the hiker box, but I do have trail food preferences that allow me to eat for pretty cheap. So I don't like to spend time in town. I don't like to spend time in hotels. I don't like to pay to sleep inside. So that's kind of my motto for getting outside.
Thank you, POD. And one thing about POD too, I think you famously are known for having hiked the PCT on, was it $2,500?
Probably. I mean, when I did the PCT in 2008, I hiked with my partner in Disco, and we only spent one night in a hotel room on the entire hike, and that was because we were trying to hitchhike out of town and it got dark and we didn't feel safe hitching anymore. So yeah, I bet it was 25 or less, honestly. Yeah. I mean, that was back in 2008. Little has changed since then, but it's still free to sleep outside. So that cost hasn't changed.
Hey folks, Larry Boy. My mom calls me Kevin here. I started hiking in 2013 and have triple crowned and done all the other usual kind of trails since then. I hike on a relatively modest budget, like say 2 out of 5 in terms of on the cheapskate scale. I don't think I can quite beat POD's record, but this past year when I did the PCT, I think I slept inside twice. So.
Hi, I'm Mike Unger. I'm, be quite honest, I am not a budget hiker. I kind of come to this a little differently. I started long distance hiking sort of mid-professional career. Around the age 40, I got fed up with the stress and the grind of sort of corporate life and consulting and quit and to hike the PCT. And that was back in 2006. And since then, I've done most years, I do at least one long distance hike, sometimes a couple. I also do some bike packing. So for me, I come to this from a different direction. I decided that the corporate grind and trying to earn more money and climb a corporate ladder wasn't worth it to me, and decided that I wanted to reorient my life so that I can hike more and have less. And I just sort of how it came about was my partner introduced me to a book called Your Money, Your Life back in the mid 90s when it was published. It was by some folks that talked about how expensive it can be to have a workaday life. When you think about going out to lunch and buying clothes and transportation, it's really expensive. And what I found was when I was doing that sort of stressful grind, I would get home at night and say, I deserve to go out and eat dinner because I'm so stressed out. So I spent tons of money and everything was about sort of accumulating. And so I've decided that's not the way I want to live. And I've been very happy these last 18 years hiking. So I'm getting ready to go on my next hike in next month.
Thank you, Mike. What I love about all three of our speakers is that they've really made through hiking their lifestyle and kind of readjusted some of their career goals and their philosophy around that. And one of the reasons why we're having this talk is I'm sure all three of you have had this experience. How do you afford to go on a through hike, and how do you find time to go on a through hike are the two top questions that I get as a through hiker. And the more I hike, the more it seems like those are questions that come up. I think also another thing to think about is running out of money is up there on the top 5 reasons that people quit or get off of a trail. And through hiking is really hard, and it only becomes more difficult when you're when you're worrying about money. And if you feel like you've at least got some padding in emergencies when you're on a through hike, that can help you make safer decisions if a storm is rolling in or if you're injured or that sort of thing. And through hiking, there's lots of small expenses that come up. And we also, this is Naomi's one thing that she really cares about, is that we really, really don't want you to have to put your through hike on a credit card. Because that definitely can start adding up over time.
I actually knew a hiker that did that, so that's sort of why I threw that in there.
How much money do you usually spend on a through hike? And you can define that per mile, per month that you're on trail. And if you could talk about sort of inflation, how costs have gone up. I know that's something that's on a lot of people's mind, because a lot of the rules of thumb these days seem to have gone out the window a little bit. So I think we'll start again with POD.
Yeah, so absolutely, with inflation and depending on where you're hiking in the world, it's definitely a sliding scale. But I tend to think about it these days as for every 4 days of hiking and maybe a half day of town food, I budget like $100 basically. And then if my itinerary has me spending any time in town, I always budget an additional, I think about every night that I pay to stay inside to be around $100 based on hotel prices these days, and if I'm sharing with someone else. And I also tack on another, say, $50 for a day in town. So if I were going to hike for 4 days, spend a night in town, and then spend most of the next day in town, so that would be 5 days, I'm looking at $100 for food, or $100 for food, $100 for the hotel, and $50 for town food, which is why I opt to not sleep in town very much, because you can see how that ratio of that 1 night in town equals 4 days of hiking. So that's kind of how I look at things these days. Of course, if I were traveling somewhere, Europe's a little more pricey, South America's a little cheaper, but that's kind of how I think about my finances.
I think those numbers to me sound about right. The numbers POD tossed out. When I'm doing like a long distance hike for several months at a time, I generally budget about $1,000 per month. I generally come in well under that, but you also have to consider the fact that you may not be intending to spend time in town, but then you have an ingrown toenail get infected, and bam, 4 days in town, and you're blowing money like crazy.
Or you get attacked by a bear.
These things happen. One other thing I think is important when we talk about costs is to kind of define the subject matter. So my $1,000 per month estimate figures in everything that I need to sustain myself during that time. That includes things like a cell bill. It includes things like health insurance, in addition to all your chicken McNuggets or ramen or whatever you're eating out there. So I generally come in, or I budget $1,000 a month. I usually don't spend it all, but that gives me the opportunity and the flexibility to, if I need to take a little bit of extra time in town or just do something nice for somebody, buy them lunch if their hike is going poorly and they could use a pick-me-up, then I have the room to do that.
I also want to add to what Larry Boy said, that one important thing when we're talking about finances is the thing I like to say all the time about life is know thyself. in the sense that I know, at least for Larry Boy and I think that we can, well, and Mike, you've seen what I eat. I'm happy with my bean slurry every night. I even eat it in town sometimes because I just throw some salt in there and it's like gourmet all of a sudden. But I think it's important to know yourself, and so for some people, I have a friend who loves through hiking and she spends a lot more money than I do, and there's nothing wrong with that. But she likes to have her town comforts as much as she likes being on trail. So when she goes into town, she wants to go have a couple drinks. She wants to spend the night in a hotel. She wants to have a good dinner. And there's nothing wrong. There's no right or wrong way. It's just important to know what it is you like for yourself. Because you don't have to do your hike on my budget if that's going to make you miserable. So just keep that in mind as you're listening to us talk about our experiences.
I would also add that a first through hike is, all things being equal, immensely more expensive
Yeah.
than any subsequent through hikes, because you have to account for just kind of the aches and pains that come with doing it for the first time, figuring out what gear you need. That might mean replacing some gear, all that good stuff. So if I were doing a first through hike, I think I would spend every bit of $1,000 per month and then probably some.
Yeah, and I think this hike your own budget, hike your own hike budget style that POD talked about is really important to keep in mind as well. And one thing I forgot to ask, and Mike, maybe you can talk about this a little bit too, is how much does travel to get to the trailhead and get back home afterwards, and how much does sort of the after, a buffer for after you finish your hike play into how much money you save for a hike? And Mike, by the way, loves his time in town as well. So it was a great sort of correlate opposite of POD here.
I do, and I mean, I have to be honest. I spend a lot more than $1,000 a month, and I think that you bring up a good point, though, Snorkel. There's a lot of costs we don't think about. I remember when I first through hike, people would throw around terms of $2 a mile, all that stuff. I think each person's so different. I can just tell you some things that I found I wasted a lot of money on. I used to think that I wanted to pre-plan all of my food and send boxes. The problem with that is, number one, shipping is very expensive. Two, you often get stuck in towns because you're waiting for boxes to arrive. But the biggest thing is you waste a lot of food. Especially in your first through hike, you might love trail mix, for your weekend day hikes. You may think, I can eat this every day. Trust me. Don't buy 50 pounds worth of Costco trail mix and send it to yourself in every town, because I've done that. And you end up wasting a lot of time and money. So there's lots of little expenses. So I think that especially your first through hike, I think both Larry and POD are really disciplined, and 1,000 is really aggressive. And that's probably I would say top the 10%, the smallest fraction of what people spend. I think most people end up spending a lot more money. I think, town is the true cost center that will drain you. But there's also little things like, over the years, I've tried to stop eating energy bars, because you can easily spend $10 a day eating energy bars, and it really adds up. So I try to keep my food budget to about $15 a day. Now, I'm someone that eats a lot of ramen and couscous, so that's easy to do. I don't like freeze-dried meals. I like to buy in grocery stores. I like to buy in town and not ship myself stuff. So there's lots of little things like that I do to save money, but everything is more expensive. I mean, going back to your travel thing, stuff just happens, and you end up spending money.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that sentiment, Mike, about your first through hike. Sending yourself boxes and sending yourself food is a money pit.
Unless you have like some really significant dietary restrictions, in that case, obviously it would be necessary.
Right. Agreed.
Yeah.
Did you quit your job before your first hike? And were you worried that someday you won't be able to find a job when you come back from the trail? This is a big concern for a lot of hikers.
I did. I quit my job happily. I was 25. I was working for General Motors in their paint department and slowly having my soul sucked out of my body. I wasn't worried about finding a job, but I was also 25, so it's a little bit different than someone who's like mid-career maybe. I knew I had a lot of employable skills and I would find something afterwards. And I have found that every interview I have done since I've thru-hiked, every single person has asked me about my thru-hike because I put it on my resume. And I find that it's a very saleable quality because it shows that you can plan for something, execute something, you know, and all the things that are required for planning for a thru-hike. And sometimes people don't know what those are, and I tell them in the interview. So I've always presented it as like the whole gap in work thing, I don't think matters that much anymore, but I always present it as like I'm someone who has a lot of stick-to-itiveness. And if I join the team, then I do my part and more. And here's proof right here that I have grit and I can get through it.
Thanks, POD. Love that spin. Larry boy.
I've quit the same job multiple times to go through hike. And I think this is actually a sentiment that you've expressed, Snorkel, so I'm just going to rip this off you. One thing that I think a lot of repeat offender thru-hikers have in common is that they're really, really good at their jobs. There is almost always a market for a proven commodity in the working world. Your old employer could go hire somebody off the street, or they can hire you. And if they know what they're getting with you, and they know that you perform, and that you're going to be a valuable asset to the team, you'll be taken back in a heartbeat. So full disclosure, I quit my job last year to hike the PCT and have done one thru-hike since then. And I just got a text the other day from my old boss, like, hey, are you done yet? Like, we need you. So never underestimate the value of kind of just quitting and trusting kind of the work that you've put in over several years to develop a reputation so that you're the kind of person they might welcome back in a heartbeat. I will say to the point about putting your thru-hike on resume, I have done that. So I've been kind of in the throes of let's try that again. I've been in the throes of job search mode recently. And I do find that having that gap in your resume, even if you put your thru-hike on the resume, doesn't necessarily dissuade people from liking you, but the algorithms really don't like that. So I've found that I get fewer interviews than other people who might not have those gaps on your resume. Now I don't regret my choice in any way whatsoever. Thru-hiking has been some of the most rewarding things I've done, but I do have a little bit of trouble getting the interview. Once I get the interview, like POD said, you learn how to, for lack of a better term, spin your experience in a way that highlights your personal and professional qualities. And you can be anything approximating a slam dunk candidate, but I do find it's a little bit tougher to get the interview.
I remember in 2009, my partner and I hiked the PCT together, and that was, folks will remember, that was a terrible year for the economy. Things were cratering. And it was also a big year on the PCT. And everyone we met on trail got a job except for one person I knew of. So I do think there's something to be said. And I actually have a lot of the people who can finish a thru-hike, as POD brought up, it takes a lot of personal discipline because there's a lot of things that can pull you off trail and cause you to not succeed in finishing. And people who have the sort of the grit to get through are people that I would hire and want to work with. But the other thing, because I worked until I was 40, I had a little different path. So I went from having a normal salaried job where I've only been a freelancer ever since. But the advantage I had was I had really good professional relationships, people who knew me, that I could come in and out and do work. And I have had some clients over the years who don't like that I leave and won't, rehire me. But most of the time, That's not a problem. And I'm able to sort of jump in and out. But that's only because I had almost 20 years of experience before I did my first through hike.
I think the common denominator there, Mike, is as employees, we're not just gifted or granted anything magically. We do have to work for it, and that sometimes means putting in the time in whatever fashion that means for, you know, your particular job or industry. Reputations take time to develop, and there was a span of time there for, I think I worked 4 years uninterrupted. I did a section hike on the side during vacation times, but essentially I was full-time employed, a normal kind of working stiff, as it were. And that experience is still serving me well, because that's where I developed my reputation. That allows me to kind of duck in and out with a little more flexibility now.
This is a question for all of you. You've talked a little bit about your job experience and coming back. At what point did you decide through hiking is so important that you want to live a hiking lifestyle? And what have you changed in your sort of everyday life to be able to continue to through hike? What sort of sacrifices have you made, for lack of a better word, career-wise, family-wise, monetarily wise? Are you eat beans every day at home?
That's not a sacrifice. I love that.
All right, POD, I'll let you tell us all about your home and trail bean dietary.
I do eat beans like every day on trail and at home. I just love beans. I mean, I'm a Mexican. What can I say? You know, I definitely made a career change. I went from engineering to education, but part of that's because I just wanted to do something different anyway. But I have made choices. I've quit a couple of different teaching jobs to go on longer hikes because my summer does not allow for a 4-month hike or whatever. So I have done that several times, and just, you know, with the expectation that I would be able to find a job. Now here in Colorado, we have a shortage of teachers in pretty much every single district. And I'm also a bilingual special education teacher. So it's relatively easy for me to find a school that wants me. I mean, they don't know me yet, but on paper they want me. Anyway, but I do, you know, my partner and I have made a lot of, I don't know if they were changes. I think he and I always had a tendency towards frugality, just because we don't want to work forever. But we make a lot of choices. We hardly ever eat out. And I hardly ever buy my coffee at a coffee shop. Hardly ever. I almost always make my coffee at home. I pack my own lunch. So there's a lot of little things like that. When we go on road trips, we camp along the way, or we sleep in the back of our Prius. Yes, 2 giants sleeping in the back of a Prius. It happens. So we make a lot of choices to be frugal in our everyday life and think about, do I really need this? And I'm sure someone could come in and watch us live and tell us other ways that we could save more money. But I do think that we actively try to be frugal. And to Mike's point about your money or your life, we actually both have a downloaded spreadsheet on our phone that we record everything, every penny we spend every month. And we have some pretty basic categories. We don't have it totally teased out, like, because the idea is to make it simplistic. But you know, we have like groceries, alcohol, eating out, gifts, I don't know, whatever. There's some other categories, and there's like an other category where we just make notes. But what that does is we know how much money we can spend every month and still be able to save a certain amount of money every month. And so if that money is $1,200, we have a running total. We're not just thinking like, oh, I think I got enough money for that. I'll just put it on the credit card. Like every time I spend, I put it on there. And that way I know that we're not going to dip into the area where, oh no, we can't save that money that we had hoped to save this month.
You know, the one point I would also make about through hiking is it teaches you to live with what's on your back. So you sort of need less. You realize that on a through hike, everything you need to sustain yourself, you're carrying yourself. And so there is a carryover into the day-to-day life off trail where you realize you need less. And I found that really helpful. So I don't feel like I need to accumulate stuff, because it just becomes a burden to have too much stuff around.
So I got into through hiking, well, in my freshman year of college. I became interested in it, and all throughout college, I wasn't quite sure if I could do it, if I had the kind of the gumption and the perseverance to do a through hike. And so I kind of made part of the hike itself making the hike happen. What I mean by that is I started working a second job in order to make some extra coin. And I started taking a bunch of extra classes. I figured if I was going to take the very maximum number of classes allowed each semester, and so hopefully I could finish a semester early, and maybe that would give me the financial and the flexibility and the time, more importantly, to do a through hike. And as it turns out, I was blessed with the opportunity to start at a company with all the summer grads, even though I was graduating at Christmas. And that gave me enough time to squeeze in the Appalachian Trail before I started work. Now, the sacrifices I have made really since then are in a sense significant. So I am not a homeowner. I've rented places when I've been working, and I tend to float and visit family and live out of my car when I'm not working, in between like through hikes or whatever. I definitely gave up some economic opportunity as well. I've continued to be rehired at the same place that I've been working on and off for 10 years. But my friends who didn't have those gaps in employment and progressed up the corporate ladder doing the rat race thing are earning significantly more than I am at our respective points in our career. And honestly, socially, I tend to be in different places at different times of years and for various stretches of time. And, I haven't seen many of my best friends in close to a year because I haven't been back to where I've done most of my living for the past decade in Utah. So those are all things that I had to consider in my personal circumstance. Now, that doesn't necessarily entail that you're going to lose all your friends and become a bum like me if you do one through hike. Maybe you will, and that'll be great. But that it is something that over time I've found that the version of me that is outside is the best me. And I'm willing to change quite a bit about my lifestyle to make that happen.
And, I want to add to that, Larry boy, about you losing all your friends and becoming a recluse. When I was saving for the CDT, I had a group of girlfriends that were all in different places in their lives. And I had this idea that I was going to go hike the CDT. And I used to have a dog, and he ended up having some surgery on his hip that was not expected, and it was not in my budget. And so I had to tighten the belt even more and get some extra work. And my girlfriends were mostly just out of relationships at that time, and they all wanted to party. And I could not do that because of my priorities. And I would just say that a lot of people end up in situations where you're trying to save money, which means you have to change your lifestyle a little bit. And I recommend being really honest with your friends and family about that. Like, I can't go to the bar, but we could all come to my house and have drinks and popcorn or whatever. And I'll just say that the friends that can understand that life change and stick with you are friends that are worth keeping. And the ones that can't are friends you want to trim off the old friend tree, in my opinion.
Yeah, there was right before I went on the CDT, all my friends were going on a ski vacation. And if there's one thing in this world that burns money, it's ski vacations. And I was like, sorry guys, I just can't. Anyway, I got a knock on my door at 11:30 at night, and they like kidnapped me and like, no, you're coming along. And everyone chipped in a couple bucks and made it happen, and we kind of did the trip on the cheap. And that was just the greatest, in terms of gifts. That was right up with some of the best gifts I've ever received, not because of the cost, but because they were willing to kind of accommodate me in that way. And that really meant a lot to me. I will also say that for all the friends you lose, you do tend to gain similarly minded hiking friends.
That's very true. Thank you, Larry Boyd. So the big question is, how do we get time off? And you've all kind of talked a little bit about tricks that you've done over the years. So when you go up to your employer, are you asking for extended vacations, sabbaticals, just straight up quitting? What are you doing about health insurance? Are you asking for health insurance? Do you get a little bit buffer with your return date? What are some of your tips and tricks for doing the old snip with your job?
I asked for an unpaid leave when I left GM. Not that I wanted to go back, but I thought, well, might as well leave the door open. And they said no. They said, oh, maybe another year you could hike it. I was like, oh, no, I'm still hiking it. That's not. But I think asking for unpaid time off, that doesn't hurt them at all. Doesn't cost them anything, depending on if they have to hire a replacement. In those years that I did quit to go hiking, I bought private insurance. I have no idea what that's like now, so I can't speak to that because now I haven't quit my job here in Salida since I've been here. I've been able to do things that fill my cup that are shorter trips and whatnot. So I can't speak to that. So I haven't really had to ask for time off since I've been in Salida, and I think I probably am just going to hope to get to retirement a little bit early and then, So I have insurance through my work.
I was actually offered unpaid leave on one of the times that I quit. They said they can only give me like a couple months, and I was planning on doing one of these country spanning trails, so that wasn't enough time. But it did kind of give me the insight that, maybe in different circumstances, maybe unpaid leave would be a possibility. I do have private insurance. It's actually a faith-based healthcare collective, which is legal as a substitute for insurance under the whatever healthcare law that was a few years ago. There may be other programs out there for people of other faiths. I'm not quite sure about that, but it essentially acts similarly to insurance and protects you from, being stuck with a gigantic medical bill. Doesn't necessarily pay for you to go to the doctor, but anything over, I think my plan is anything over $500, it just takes care of with no in-network versus out-of-network kind of monkey shines. So that's definitely an opportunity for some people, depending on their life circumstances.
I wanted to add too that I just thought of this. I have an InReach, and just to throw it out there, part of that plan you can pay like $15 a year or something like that, and it will cover any search and rescue. So, it's not insurance, but it will cover a search and rescue if you're in a state that does not cover those costs. So
I will say, even if you're young and healthy, get insurance when you hike because stuff happens and you don't want to have those medical bills over your head. And when I did my first Thru-Hike, it was before the ACA, which is the Healthcare Act, where it was very easy to be denied insurance. So I was lucky enough to buy a catastrophic plan, but it was difficult. And so it's a lot easier now to go and have to buy in the exchanges. And if your income is low, it's partially subsidized. So there's no reason not to have insurance because stuff does happen. And those medical bills it's the number one cause of bankruptcy. You just don't want to have that.
To Mike's point, I've had a couple of medical incidents on trail over the years. And one of them, I was in the ER for 6.5 hours, and, it was close to a 10 grand medical bill. And, I had this healthcare collective that covered it all. But I think that's very wise advice, Mike, that bears reiterating. Going without health insurance is simply not an option because
especially in this country.
Yeah, the cost can be catastrophic and can wipe you out.
Yep.
Yeah, along the lines of what POD was saying about helicopter rescue, search and rescue, I've had a friend who got charged with a 32K bill for a helicopter rescue. So these things are not cheap. All right, so now we'll transition to the fun stuff. You're on your through hike, you quit your job, you've got your money saved up for your through hike. How are you going to lower your hiking budget? What are some of your tips for keeping your costs down when you're on the trail?
Well, I'm a mono eater, as you know. I eat the exact same thing every single day, which makes buying, I can buy more cheaply because I can buy the big bag of nuts instead of 8 different snacks. I mean, food costs, I mean, like Mike said, what's better than a, $3 protein bar is a handful of almonds or salted nuts. It's a lot cheaper and in the end, it doesn't have the sugar and everything. But I think, trying to stick to it's interesting if you stick to kind of the whole ingredients type of foods, they tend to actually be cheaper. Um, I don't do any of those fancy backpacker meals. I do dehydrated refried beans. Um, and I even like to eat the little bean chips dry because I don't know, they're like chips. They're so good. Anyway, I digress about my beans. Yeah, and just like the same thing when I'm in town, I'm actually a little freer with my money when I'm on trail than in my day-to-day life. Because for me, it's kind of like a vacation. And also I don't have the means to make coffee every morning when I'm in town. I don't have a coffee maker or, whatever. So it's exciting for me to go buy a coffee at the coffee shop. But then again, I do limit myself. I buy like the one good coffee. And then if I decide I want another coffee later, I go to the gas station or McDonald's or whatever. So I just try to, I just try to keep it balanced. I try to buy healthy but inexpensive food. Um, I make my treats like apples and carrots at the grocery store. But again, know thyself. That does not work for everybody. And I don't stay in town very much, so yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the number one thing. Limit town stays. But I will give a quick pro tip, and this is actually your tip, Snorkel. I learned from you. And that is if you're staying at a hostel or a room that you have a little kitchenette, number one, it's a great idea to save money because it's fun to cook with a group of people on trail in a kitchen. But I love to hike out with town food. I've always found eating difficult on the trail. And so the thing I learned from Snorkel was grilled cheese sandwiches. So you buy a loaf of bread, a chunk of cheese, a big block of butter, and you do up grilled
And you
cheese
eat
sandwiches.
all of it.
You do, and the fat, it's so satisfying. It's great energy. It's super affordable, and it's a break from normal trail food. And it is, my partner and I do it on every trip that we stay in town that we have access to a kitchen. And even when we were in Iceland, hiking across Iceland this last year, and you talk about expensive trails, $20 beers. We did grilled cheese sandwiches in Iceland to hike. So little things like that, finding things you can hike out with is a nice change of pace. Because I do think the thing that surprised me most about being a thru hiker was how hard eating was. And I'm a good eater. I eat everything. But I found on trail, very few foods satisfied me and gave me the energy I needed. So that's always been a struggle. I find hiking out town food has helped fill in those gaps for me.
Limiting the length of town stays is the number one way to reduce costs. In particular, hotels. Like you used to be able to get to like within the past like 6-ish years. I remember when I did the CDT, I got a room in Wardsburg for $29.
Wow.
Like that room probably costs $89 now. Like inflation, yeah, everything's more expensive, but lodging in particular is absolutely ridiculous now compared to what it was 6, 8, 10 years ago. Now I don't want to like sit with my shawl and go, back in my day. This is just to say that the advice that you get from people when they say discuss how much they spent might still be back in the days of a $30 hotel room. So yeah, limiting just length of time in town is just so important. I generally get one meal in town I like to get breakfast because it's the most affordable, and usually what like small town diners do the best. Like even if the burgers are dry, it's pretty hard to mess up breakfast. So I like to kind of get breakfast as my main meal in town. But if you can be in and out of town in 3, 4, 5 hours, you save a fortune just because every minute you're in town, there's like, oh, I should get a pop. Oh, ice cream cone. And that it just happens over and over and over. And it feels great. It's great to eat town food. But the faster you can get in and out of town, the more money you save.
And I'll also say that there's the town Nero, like camp really close to town, like you said, go in, get a huge breakfast. That breakfast can carry you for a couple meals. You rest, you relax, you get your town chores down, you get out in time where you only got to hike a few miles, so it feels still like a rest day, but you don't have to spend the night in town. And I think if you can do that and learn to be satisfied with that, when you do have, you're really not feeling well, there's something happening at home, you need to be in town for a night, the weather is absolute crap. When you have those situations, you don't have to feel stressed or bad about staying in a hotel. You're like, I'm an adult, I have an adult situation happening, whatever that is. I need to be in town tonight, and I'm not going to sweat it because the last 4 towns, I didn't spend the night in town. So I got the money.
Yeah, I think all of this talk about the near zero is really the key. And this past weekend, Naomi and I were at the American Long Distance Hiking Association West workshop, Brook. And one of the things that got thrown around for the cost of a through hike is $10 per hour that you're in town. Dig in a little bit more about eating. Do you have any tips for walking into that restaurant and saving some money around restaurants in town? Because when we're hiking, we're really hungry. All we want to do is eat. What are things that have worked to help keep you from ordering that second entree, which is totally something I've done before on trail?
Well, one of the things, I mean, part of the problem is, especially my first through hike, everything was a novelty. Like I hadn't had a candy bar in 20
Mhm.
years. And so you're like, wow, I'm going to eat as many candy bars. And I would end up overeating. And I've learned over time that
Yeah.
it just destroys my body. But that's one of those things you have to learn, and each person is different. Like I have a hiker friend that would get into town. The first thing he would do is eat a can of beans because it would fill him up, so he didn't go into a restaurant with this huge hunger. But I am probably not the best person to talk about because I do splurge and enjoy going into a restaurant. The one thing I've learned, and I shouldn't admit this, but my very first through hike at the PCT, I had 30 zeros. So I was every town I thought you had to take a zero. That was just what hikers did. And in subsequent hikes, I realized that I felt just as good and just as satisfied with a Nero, where I go in there, I might spend one night in town, take a shower, do my laundry, buy my food, and head out the next day in the afternoon. I save probably $150 and I feel just as rested. So part of it is just learning that you think you need all this stuff, and you don't. But that's one of those things that took me a while to learn. I don't do 30 zeros anymore on a hike. Though I have tried to do, like I tried to do a speed hike of the AT by myself a few years ago, and I said wasn't going to take any zeros. But after a month and a half, I took a zero. I was just my body needed it. I was
Yeah.
born. So it's not for everybody. I would love to do a through hike without any zeros. I've tried it. I just haven't succeeded.
Yeah. I'll say one, I do like to go when I get into town before I go to a restaurant, I like to go get an apple and, a bag of mini carrots or something like that. Snack on some of that stuff first, before I go into a restaurant because you're less hungry and less likely to like over order. The other thing that Disco and I do sometimes, we'll go to a gas station first and get like I'll get like a fountain soda because those are usually like 99 cents or something. Whereas in a restaurant it'll cost you like 2.50. And Disco will get like a couple of tall boy beers from the cooler, just cheapies. Um so and like, a beer is gonna be draft beer is gonna be $4 or $5, $6 in a restaurant. So if you have two 16-ounce beers at the gas station in a brown bag for $3.50, instead of two $6 pints, you saved quite a bit of money, and you look hella cool with your tall boys in your brown paper bag. So yeah,
Cool. Is that what we're calling it these days? Yeah. Okay.
yeah, that's
Uh,
what we call it.
Well, one thing I
So,
want to say that feeds on what POD was is that hydrating before you eat, something more than half of people can't tell the difference between when they're hungry and when they're thirsty.
Mhm.
When you're through hiking, you're probably a little bit of both. So being able to just rehydrate your body before you go drop a lot of money at a restaurant, I think just like getting that food before you go to a restaurant food is one of those tricks. Get a Gatorade, get a 99-cent
Mhm.
soda.
And then when we have a drink before we go to the restaurant, then in the restaurant you just get water, and our goal is always to finish that water that they bring us during the meal, so then you've had all that liquid.
yeah, hydrate like it's your job. One thing I do is sometimes I just forego the restaurant entirely, especially in a town that's a little bit spread out, where if I,
Mhm.
go to the restaurant and then go to the grocery store, I'm going to walk 2 miles, and who wants to do that on your town day? Oftentimes I'll just go straight to the grocery store. If it's a big grocery store, they generally have a deli counter, and they'll have like a rotisserie chicken, or honestly, what I'll do a lot of times, I know this is kind of disgusting, but I'll get an entire rotisserie chicken, a lemon meringue pie, and a quart of chocolate milk, and pound it all like behind the
The
grocery
whole
store.
chicken?
Yeah, of course.
Wow.
A whole chicken is nothing.
Oh my
Like, there's
God.
so much bone happening in there. Like, it's still a good value for your money. But like a whole chicken is not that big of a deal. And that'll fill me up for probably several hours for sure. The other thing is, if you're going to do a short town stay, find a place to charge right away. And if you can, just charge one device. Like if you just have a battery bank to charge, that's ideal. So you charge everything from your battery bank, your phone or your headlamp or whatever before you get into town. So your phone's 100%, your headlamp's 100%. You plug in your battery bank. It takes what, 3, 4, 5 maybe hours to charge if you have like a 10,000 milliamp bank. And you basically structure your town time so that you can be charging the entire time. Charge while you're at the grocery store, charge while you're at the laundromat, and just kind of go from one place to another, seeking outlets.
Can any of you, and I'm kind of looking at POD, talk a little bit about the party scene and alcohol and expenses related to that?
There is a party scene for sure in most of the through hiking world, and you can opt in or opt out. You can do it any way you want. You can hang with those folks and not drink, or choose to participate. I do think that that group of people in that lifestyle tend to spend more time in town and just do fewer miles, and that's fine too. That's the way they want to do it, but I think it is a little more expensive. So like I said, know thyself. If that's your jam, you just got to budget a little bit more for that. If that's what's gonna, if that's what's gonna make your hike great for you, you just got to be ready for that and plan that it's going to be significantly more expensive than what I think the three of us are talking about.
I would also add cannabis in that same alcohol category.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people blow a lot of money on weed. That's another great opportunity to kind of save money and possibly even embrace a lifestyle that's a little bit more conducive to finishing the trail. If finishing the trail is something that's important to you.
Okay, so what's going to happen next? We're going to do a really quick run through some of the Q&A, and then we're going to finish off the evening to let each of the panelists give their sort of parting words of advice on finances. All right, so one question is, can the panel discuss not shipping packages a little more? I was surprised to hear this. Do you find the food you want every time you go to town? And I think just one of you can speak on that unless you have strong opinions.
I'm someone that almost tries to never ship packages. And I can usually make do. I mean, it can get tougher in small towns that just have sort of gas convenience stores. But if it's for a few days, it's easier to buy what's available than to try to ship. I mean, when you ship, it's going to be probably, I think it's $20 to $25 for a flat rate box. then the other thing that, and this is less money related and more time related, it can be stressful thinking, okay, when's the post office open? And if you arrive late on a Friday, you may be stuck until Monday to be able to get your box. Now it's not possible to do that everywhere. The one thing I do is if I have to send boxes, I try to send it to someone other than a post office if I can. If there's another business that's willing to accept boxes. Another pro tip, always call in advance. Call a post office, call a business that you want to send to, and make sure they'll accept your box. But and I also get tired of food. So it's hard for me to know what I'm going to like a month from now after being on the trail for weeks. So it's better to go into town. But I do boxes, but my goal is to do them as little as possible.
I'll also say that people tend to like overpack or undersend. So if you overpack, you're wasting money, you're leaving food in town. And if you undersend, you still have to go to the grocery store anyway. So
True.
I would love to hear what each of the panelists say or something you haven't covered yet, or sort of parting words for people who are going out trying to save money on a thru hike, or maybe restructure their life for a thru hiking lifestyle.
I think I would say we've covered a lot of stuff on here, and I'm not going to reiterate on that. I would just say I would encourage you to surround yourself with people who are going to encourage you, not just tolerate, but encourage you towards your goals. So if your goal is to thru hike in 2 years or 2 months or 10 years or 20 years, and that means you have very specific things that you need to do to change in your life, to save money, to change careers, to build towards an optional second career once you're done with your hike, then make a list of those things that are important to you, those steps that you need to do, and surround yourself with people that will encourage you to be hitting those targets, and get rid of the people that want to detract you from your goals.
I guess my one thing I've realized the benefit of over the years is consistency. Particularly on a first thru hike, it's really tempting to try and push your body while you're on trail, and then you collapse into town tired and exhausted, and town has beds and beers and burgers, and all those things sound really good, and they are. One thing I've learned over the years, never give 100%. Always keep enough in the tank so that you can replicate today's performance tomorrow. Rather than doing 25, 25, 25, 25, 0, I do 20, 20, 20, 20, 20. Still gets me the same distance in 5 days, 100 miles. But I'm not in this boom and bust cycle, the binge and purge, if you want to call it that, of using up all my energy and then just being exhausted. Just maintaining that equilibrium and making thru hiking a more physically sustainable lifestyle, in addition to financially sustainable lifestyle, has done wonders for me.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful advice. I knew some people that would brag about doing 35 to 40 miles a day, but then have to take 2 zeros afterward to recover. And what's the point of that? I'm gonna talk about more of a practical cost savings gear thing. To me, the most expensive gear that I have on a thru hike are my shoes. And you need multiple pairs. And the one advice, especially for a first thru hiker, is do not start a thru hike with a new pair of or brand type of shoe you've never worn before, or you've worn very little. Use a shoe that you have done hundreds of miles in that you know are good. Because I can tell you, my partner switched shoes before her first thru hike and had to go through 4 different pairs of shoes in the first 3 weeks with terrible blisters and thinking she was going to have to quit the trail because no shoes would work. Your feet swell. Figure out your footwear, what's going to work for you long term, so you don't have to be switching out lots of stuff. And know that your shoes will break down, and sometimes it's after 300 miles. If you're lucky, it's after 500. But know that's going to be a significant expense on your trail.
Yeah. So I guess what I would just love to add is remember that savings is a double-edged blade, in that not only are you saving money for your goal, which is to hike, but you're also teaching yourself to live with less, and it brings that bar down even further for the future. And so you need less, you can save more, and you can hike more, which is what all of us here on this top row of speakers want to do. We all want to hike more. And I'm guessing because you're all here, that's what you want to do as well. So yeah, just teach yourself to live with less. And it just opens up your world. That's sort of what we talk about at Treeline, and that's why we want people to buy the right gear for them and for themselves. And that's why we do all of this testing. Yeah, we want you to hike more or do what you want with your life. So thank you all so much for coming tonight. Thank you so much to the panel, Larry Boy, POD, Iron Mike Unger. We loved having you. And so thank you all so much for coming.